until the people realize that instead of going like this with each other, they have to go like this to defeat the very evil that lords over them, we will be in the same position we are now, perpetually, forever, with the risks becoming even more grave and the damage becoming unimaginable. And so the call to action is drop your sword against your neighbor, accept them as a human being, and unite against the very powers that seek to divide you.
From the beginning, the lines were drawn. I said this virus came from the lab. Tony said I was wrong. I was only the head of CDC until I got iced out. I was told it was the White House. I don't buy that.
It was a cover.
Why would we trade the Chinese the most advanced biotechnology in the world?
He's a spy.
It's insane.
I don't think this is going to be foolproof. Things are going to slip through.
Fauci knew and lied repeatedly.
Now streaming exclusively on Angel.
I hope you all enjoyed that trailer, because in tonight's show, we are taking you behind the scenes of Thank You, Dr. Fauci, a new investigative documentary from director Jenner First and producer Louis Fenton. This film exposes the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic and the investigative journey behind uncovering multiple discoveries around the pandemic. We will be talking with filmmakers about how this project came to life, the process of their investigative storytelling, and what it took to bring this documentary to us here at Angel. So stay tuned for the end as well, because we're going to be showing a sneak peek of the documentary. But if you want to watch it right now, you can become an Angel member by going to angel.com/Fauci Guild. That's angel.com/Fauci Guild, or scan that QR code on screen. Become an Angel member. That's how we put things out like this. That's how we distribute all of these films, series, and documentaries. Thank you so much for supporting us in that way. But without further ado, let's just jump right into it. I'm so privileged to be introducing director I'm so privileged to be introducing director Jenner First and producer Louis Fenton. Thank you both so much for joining.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Mike.
I would love to just jump into the story behind the story to begin this interview. But every documentary, it seems, starts with questions or a question. I would love to ask, what was your guys' question? And let's just start with Jenner. Let's start with you.
Well, I had experienced the pandemic like everyone else on the planet and had my life completely disrupted. And prior to meeting Louis and Scott, the producers who really bravely came up with this idea to investigate Fauci and who aligned independent resources, free of censorship, free of any, overarching editorial demands, I was, I think, cynical at best that the story that was being told in the media was the story. But like many people in the world, I had to just go on with my life. And I wasn't in a position of investigating the pandemic. Ironically, in the beginning of the pandemic, I had been attached to a movie about Dr. Fauci that was produced by George Clooney, and it didn't move forward. And that movie was basically about his role in stopping the AIDS pandemic in Africa. And meanwhile, there was another documentary being made about him for Nat Geo, and for whatever reason, that movie didn't sell. Maybe it was fate, because ultimately when Louis got in touch with me and we were connected through our attorney, that I had this weird connection already to knowing about Fauci and potentially being a person who was going to direct, for all intents and purposes, a puff piece about the man and his amazing heroic efforts. And so when I had the conversation with Louis and Scott, there was a sense of, I think, jadedness and cynical inquiry that comes with my field, and that I don't believe the media. I don't believe what's been reported. That's just a baseline for an investigative documentary filmmaker, because you understand that media can be and usually is a manipulation, and that you have to understand what's being presented to you, pitched to you. You have to understand just the general mechanisms of censorship and product placement and overarching
Mhm.
control. And so I wasn't completely closed off to what they were saying. And I think what struck me the most was the genuine quality for which Lewis specifically had to understand the truth. And he believed in his heart of hearts, based on the information he had consumed and sought out outside of the mainstream media, that a horrible injustice had happened, that it was bigger than COVID, that Anthony Fauci was essentially a figurehead for something really, really heinous and unjust, and that needed to be investigated. And what drew me in was first his respect for my career that thus far, and his desire to make sure that whoever did take on the role of directing the film and independently investigating Anthony Fauci was someone who had a reputable career and could be trusted to be non-biased, and that when the outside was looking in, it would not be seen as a political film. And my political background to date, if anything, was democratic, if not leftist. I consider myself a progressive, radical, which in this day and age kind of almost dovetails into libertarianism. But I don't believe in any of our political system anymore. And I think the film about Fauci was the end of it for me. So I committed to them that I would be open minded about looking into this to see if I could direct it. And what is amazing, and I'll just say, is after just 2 hours of going on the internet and searching based on what they had said to me and what I had willfully ignored because I didn't have any interest in looking into it, it was absolutely apparent that there was a massive cover up, that there was evidence to suggest that the origins of COVID was not the wet market. And beyond being in the lab and potentially a leak, there was evidence of a 20-year history in bioweapons development and an extremely sinister story that took the paint off the wall for me. And I believe I got in touch with them the next day and said that I was open to investigating it and I would like to be able to make the film with them.
Wow. So, Lewis, with your part of the story, where did you begin with this story before you approached Jenner with it?
Yeah, so my partner and I, Scott St. John, and I think one of the most basic questions we had is what a lot of people had for a long time, which was, where did the pandemic come from? But the more fundamental question was always, what is the truth here? This massive worldwide thing happened to all of us, inconveniencing all of us. It looked like the treatments and the processes and the laws were wildly inconsistent, but no one was searching for the truth, and no one seemed to care. And that, to me, just is just very as a storyteller, when there's such a massive story, no one seems concerned with the truth. It's just dying to be overturned. That this stone there, especially when there was such a large phenomenon and so much death and money and economic turmoil the worldwide, and no one was looking for the truth. It was all messaging and silencing and censoring. So that was the core question, and maybe that's the core question of any great documentary: is what is the truth here? This happened to be perhaps the greatest cover-up, one of the largest stories ever, certainly in this century. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, clearly as far as a medical corruption or cover-up, and no one seemed concerned with getting to the absolute truth.
Yeah, I think that was one of the craziest parts watching the documentary is to your point, like, it made you feel crazy. Like, are we the only ones that like care to tell this story? And like, why
Right.
aren't there more people yelling from the rooftop sort of deal? So with that, though, so both of you come together, you decide you want to make this documentary, you're pursuing the story. Were there any challenges right off the bat trying to get the story off the ground? Because like you were saying, Lewis, people just didn't seem concerned about it.
Yeah, well, on one hand, there was the epitome of challenge in that you're going against probably the most systematic cover up in history, in which every media outlet that was a reputable media outlet, including right wing outlets, have covered up facts around this because it implies far too many people. But what was an interesting paradox was that on one hand, you had extreme censorship and you had sort of a peanut gallery of conspiracy theories that made no sense, which is how we decided to start the film. Like any other person who lived through COVID, you have to wade through every conspiracy theory that you've been told about COVID. And of course, the one that is the most popular is that it didn't come from a wet market. It came from a lab and that was covered up. But really, in effect, the biggest conspiracy was that it came from a wet market and that some of the world's biggest scientists elaborated behind closed doors to create a narrative that made no sense scientifically and that there was no genetic evidence for. What is an interesting paradox about all of this is that despite the censorship, the people who actually knew what happened, from the then CDC director Robert Redfield to people like Rixey, who was running Drastic, key member in Drastic, a decentralized investigation, to Richard Ebright, one of the oldest foes of Anthony Fauci, and a molecular biologist who understood genetically, to a whole cast of scientists who spoke out about this and knew the genetic evidence, to whistleblowers, to people in the State Department. All they needed to do was be contacted and verify that the storyteller was actually someone who could be trusted to tell a story or has made a film before, and that the film was being supported in an independent way that was not controlled by a massive media outlet, and everybody wanted to talk. And I found that in reaching out, I was able, in a matter of weeks, through contacting the right people, to find every single voice that should be trusted in this debate because they had either the body of work that let them understand genetically or scientifically what this virus was, or the intelligence background to understand what we were doing in China, why it was dangerous and wrong, and why the writing was on the wall that this virus was going to get out and that America had funded it. And all of that came together very quickly. And there were folks who had been cast aside, blacklisted, silenced, and all they were focused on was the truth. And none of them had made millions of dollars on their social media platform, spewing lies. None of them were promoting projects of their own. None of them had an agenda other than being committed to the truth and being willing to share things that others were too scared to share. And unlike me, who had just flown in the last hour to put this all together with Lewis and our other partners and bring it to the world, these people had braved, at that point, over 3 years of complete alienation and repeated consequence for speaking out and telling the truth. And so on one side, you had the worst censorship of the most consequential story in history. On the other, you had people who knew what they were talking about and continued to be brave enough to talk about it with no monetary benefit and with no celebrity behind it. And if anything, the risk of being completely eliminated physically from this planet for some of them, and the rest of them suffered career damage that still exists to this day, even though they told the truth. So I don't know if I answered your question, but that, I believe, is an interesting paradox about people being willing to talk.
Yeah, I think the bravery of the people willing to stand up for the truth, I think, very much came across in the documentary. Lewis, for you, were there any glaring challenges after the film got up on its feet and you guys started making the documentary? Did you feel any pushback? Was there any pushback?
Yeah, for sure. And in the beginning, there was pushback in the beginning. It's just the career suicide angle to it. You know, Hollywood's very brave in many areas, but there's some places you just could not go, and this was one of them. And I remember taking meetings looking for distributors or even donors or anyone like that, and just just a absolute knee-jerk rejection of what we're doing in sort of a way that seemed just crazy to me. Going back to what we first talked about, like, where is the probing for truth? I know these. I'm looking at these people. In many cases, I know them. I've known them for years. They just did not want to go there, and that to me sort of disturbing. And so the people that raised the money for the film are all completely independent people that we had to find on our own. My own money is wrapped into this movie. Like, so that was the initial challenge, is finding people to support it in its early stages. And then you're asking about later on, again, speaking to possible distributors, it had the same effect on these people. And again, this is Hollywood, where we're supposed to be brave and truth seeking and seeking other angles on stories, and just very little interest and a lot of resistance. And I know for Jenner, it was especially disturbing and eye-opening because he's got a long history of people lining him up for interviews and things. And when those first tentacles went out to explore those opportunities, just everyone just disappeared.
Wow.
Yeah, I can say that, my body of work at this point has been seen by over 1 billion people. The series I made prior to this movie had 100 million streaming hours in 2 weeks and was on the top 10 of Netflix for weeks, almost a month. I've never had a documentary I've made in my adult life, aside from maybe my first documentary, that did not have massive distribution, and that many of the documentaries that I've made have had massive press exposure. I've been on morning shows. I've had stories that were on the front page and went over across the fold. This is not to gloat or brag. This is to give you a sense of the extreme contrast between those stories, which none of which were as consequential as not just the origin of COVID, but a secret arms race that threatens the very existence of the human race and potentially the entire planet. And I was met with zero press response after a press release that went to 5,000 outlets and after outreach to several different outlets. And there was also, and these are my personal relationships, some of which, that I believe that earnest writers who may have wanted to cover it could not cover it because the editors had shut down the story. And we have to ask ourselves why, how could this be? Or for many of us, we are struck with the sense of it being, it validating what we already knew was true, which is that truth really doesn't exist. It's in the eye of the broadcaster. And that when you really want to tell the truth and the bottom line or the sense of control systematically that is in place is threatened by that, you're not going to be able to get that story out. And so that gets at the heart of why we're even here to begin with. And so every guild member should think about that we're here right now because everyone else had an opportunity to tell this story and not a single one of them was brave enough except for Angel. So that I have to embrace with gratitude. And I know Lewis feels the same way, that we went and gave every single person, including the ones I worked with, a chance to broadcast this story and support the truth, which is bore out in fact. It's not an opinion. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's a fact-based film that's non-biased, non-partisan, seeks to investigate the truth. And Angel was the only one brave enough to do it.
No, thank you for sharing that. And I think that goes to like you said, our guild members, because our model doesn't allow us to like green light something without the guild, the audience's approval. So I think that goes to just the broad public wants the truth. It's not controlled by the broadcasters like you were saying. So I think they saw your story, they saw your team's pursuit of truth, and they wanted to spread it. So I think just there's one for the guild. You did a good job in that, guys. So appreciate the guild so much. But I'd love to talk about next the investigation process. So the film starts, it's off the ground, you start getting people interviewed, everything else like that. But first, before my first question about the investigation process, I'd love to just tell everyone, if you have not seen Thank You, Dr. Fauci, this new documentary on the Angel platform, please become a member by going to angel.com/Fauci Guild. There you can sign up to become a member and you'll gain access to this wonderful documentary, as well as hundreds of other movies and series. So check it out there. But the first question I'd like to ask you both is, this story is a global one. It's a global pandemic. So what was it like reaching for opinions and everything else in a global scale? Like, you had to reach out to other people in other countries. What was that process like? Jenner, let's start with you with that question. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's important to note that when we began this story that we were attempting to tell to the world, that the story had essentially already been told in many different mediums, whether it be decentralized internet forums to even investigative journalism across multiple outlets. There were people covering it month to month as congressional hearings were unfolding. There was a Senate committee, there was a House committee, and there was previous documents that together were probably over 200,000 pages of investigative material, from grant proposals to scientific studies and other things, intelligence reports, things that existed. And I think for us, and I know for me, you can give everybody all of that and they'll just be sitting with the same information that's been out there, and none of it is going to do anything to further their actual comprehension of what happened, how it affects them, and why it is so consequential. And so for me as a storyteller, one of the first things that I sought out to do with Lewis and the rest of our team was to find a way to synthesize and distill what had happened in the evidence itself and present an experience that could be accessible for the viewer. And so in order to do that, I went to the most organic, truthful, and authentic way possible, which was, for the first time in my career, to open my process as an investigator to the viewer so that they could join me sifting through all of this material and know that all I care about is the truth. And here we are walking through it together. And so I decided to let the cameras roll on me and my team, my producers, Lee Schweninger and Attica J. Torrance, people I've worked with for like 20 years. I said, all right, guys, we're going to get into this. Are you cool with recording it so that we can at least have the option to show the viewer what we went through? Because everybody's going to come after us and tell us we manipulated everything. Everybody's going to come after us and tell us we had a political agenda. Everybody's going to come after us and say this is sponsored by some super PAC. The truth is, it couldn't be further from that, right? You look at someone like myself and Lee and Attica, we have a complete opposite background to that. And yet we're radical thinkers. We're well-read. We know how to investigate things and look at things. And so that was a key decision. Do not present just talking heads telling you facts. Allow the viewer to understand that you yourself are cynical of everything, that you want the truth, and that you're willing to bring them along for that, good, bad, and ugly, and which through the process of doing that, the viewer, the person, the truth seeker, we become the collective truth seeker together. And the shocks that I went through, which some of them were earth-shattering. I can legitimately say that I am not the same person I was before I made that film, and I have chills now. There were moments that I went home and questioned every single thing that I held dear to me. That is how consequential this is. And what we sought out to do was not just give you the straight up fact-based story, but to allow us all to process almost on an emotional level that we've been severely betrayed and lied to, that the stakes are enormous, that our children's lives were permanently disrupted, that livelihoods were completely changed forever, that social control was exercised and auditioned in a way that's now become permanent, and that this was a minor event compared to the very major things that are in laboratories now being researched under the guise of pandemic prevention that could change our society forever. And to do that, you have to expand the scope enough for us to see that this is not a new story and that we all went through, at least the three of us, and I know Lewis and Scott and my partner, Arnold Rifkin, who has been in this industry for 50 years, making movies and knowing every storyteller there was in this town and New York, went through earth-shattering revelations that hurt us down to the core of our souls. And there were things that we uncovered that were way bigger than just the origin of COVID. For example, during COVID, the Senate had a hearing. During COVID, there was a House hearing about the origins of Lyme's disease. So think about this. We're in the middle of COVID. No one is reporting on this House hearing to go into the fact that we have known that the origin of Lyme's disease was Plum Island off the coast of Long Island, and that it was a research facility for bioweapons being transmitted through insects. And they were doing repeated studies on it, and that there is no way that that Lyme's disease is not the product of Plum Island, because it was a derivative of Rocky Mountain fever, which was from the Rockies, and it ended up on the coast of Connecticut. And so we ourselves are going through this earth-shattering thing, like, oh my God, I've dealt with the threat of Lyme's disease my whole life. That is insane. I've had Lyme's disease. I know people who've had Lyme's disease. The other is, wow, this looks exactly like what just happened. They named it one thing because they had to cover up it came from somewhere else, and no one's ever connected the pieces other than investigators that this didn't come from Lyme, Connecticut. It came from a lab off the coast of Lyme, Connecticut. And then what I would say would probably be the most earth-shattering moment for me, because I have relatives who have died from AIDS. I have friends who have died from AIDS. I have people I know with HIV and AIDS. And for me to think back at all of the carnage that I experienced just as a child growing up in the midst of the AIDS pandemic, to think that there was a possibility, and there remains a possibility, that scientific arrogance in pursuit of a vaccine for polio may have inadvertently caused the first major outbreak of HIV, which may have existed for 1,000,000 years, but it had never had an articulated outbreak until after a trial of a polio vaccine in the Congo. And 2 years later, there's an articulated outbreak. And that what was the most shocking and disturbing thing was, in the 90s, when that story came out, the same crew that discredited it and was funded by Anthony Fauci in many different research grants and was in place to discredit this incredibly credible hypothesis, can be found for the next 20 years doing the same thing, including covering up the origin of COVID. So when you go back in time and you look at the pattern, the things you reveal are so shocking that they undermine your very sense of reality and what you believe. And that was something that I authentically went through. There was no agenda. There was just, let's take this layer and peel it back here. Whoa, that doesn't look good. Let's take that layer and peel it back here. Wow, that's really frightening. Let's take this one, which is the scariest one, and go like this. I don't think I can ever see the world again after seeing that layer. So that's a process we all went through together, and we wanted to bring that to the viewer, the watcher, the truth seeker, so that they could understand that A, this was authentic, earnest, honest in its pursuit, clear on its agenda, that it had nothing other than the truth that it sought, and two, to experience it together, to let us all experience this together. Let us all bring the truth in, think about our lives as a whole, think about everything we believed in. Think about what we go into a voting booth with, what we take our kids to school and think about when we think about safety and all these things, experience it together. And it was an earth-shattering moment for us. And what we've experienced in showing the film in the limited settings we've been able to before this moment with Angel is that everyone who saw the film had a similar response. They felt almost nauseous by the end of it. And that's what we felt. And so that was our approach all along.
Yeah, I think in watching it, the earth shattering, you kept saying that over and over. And I think that is something that I was feeling as well. And I think looking at like guild comments, it's just so shocking. And you think, okay, that's as far deep as it goes. And then like you were saying, another layer, and you're like, no way. And it just kept getting over and over and over again. Lewis,
Hey, Mike, just on your international question.
Yes.
It is a cool angle of the show and interesting of the movie, rather. You know, Anthony Fauci is obviously American. He's US. He's a Brooklyn guy. But what the movie dives into, what the story dives into, is what we don't hear enough about. You hear the wet market versus lab leak. You don't hear about this international cabal of scientists that have been sort of recklessly experimenting with these gain-of-function diseases and risking all of our lives for years and years and years. And as Jenner just said, many of them are involved in the same cover-ups over years. Ebola, it's the same guys. Fauci, it's the same guys. Some old avian flu that got out briefly, it's the same guys. And it's in the UK, and the lab is in China because they don't really want it here because there was laws on the oversight here in the US and things got a little dicey. So they conveniently moved that research to China out of sort of prying eyes of regulation here in the US. So it is an international story. Australian scientists, Peter Daszak, who's scraping cave walls in India for bat guano. There is a very disturbing to most cachet among a certain set of scientists in the world where they want so badly to discover the newest and the deadliest, and with no regard for what that risks. And yes, the way they couch it is they want to develop then a vaccine, and so they're actually heroically scraping walls and in these areas trying to find new bat derivative, bird derivative diseases and viruses. But it's shocking to see how intentional it is and how there's a machinery for covering up when these things do go wrong and they do escape, and a history of them escaping where it just never broke out in the news. And the same characters come up to work together to push the papers, to hide it and bring it out of the news cycle. And once you see it, it's horrifying to see how close we've come to sort of these mass casualty events. And in many ways, this was inevitable.
So, Lewis, would you also say that you had a similar experience in creating this documentary as Jenner had, as in like over and over, an earth-shattering, like no way sort of experience? Was that similar for you?
Yeah, I mean, we had our theories, and there was plenty of data for just the average person to piece things together. A lot of the data was just laying there for everyone to see. There's a lot of conferences, medical conferences, where these guys are talking about, like, oh yeah, that one escaped briefly, but luckily we got the cap on in time, and and on that one, I mean, they're almost talking like they're trading baseball cards, like, oh yeah, that virus that would have killed like two and four people. That was a doozy, 2 and 3 people. That was great. And you're watching it and it's horrifying. And so there was that, and there was all of the various Fauci pronouncements that made no sense. And there was just the obvious came out of that lab specifically. There was a lot of that. But what Jenner uncovered with the deeper digging is this cabal that makes it more deeply disturbing, because it's these same faces, these same guys on this Slack chat. When Fauci starts to panic, that people are asking questions about if it's lab or if it's wet market, because some real scientists, to their credit, are taking an instant look at it, and in 2 seconds seeing these furin cleavage sites, which is just a way to examine basically the code of the virus and see this is not something that exists in nature. In fact, this is an exact technique that we've been using to increase the virality of these viruses for years. And Fauci has this panic, and he instantly calls together this crew on the Slack chat. And here these guys are, and Jenner's team got that Slack chat. You can see what they're saying, and that's disturbing. But then the extra layers, you go back in time for Ebola and these other outbreaks, and guess what? It's the same people. It's the same people there in the beginning. It's the same people there denying and saying there's nothing to see here, folks. And that was the most deeply disturbing thing that I took away as the research played out. And I think that's the most important thing for people to take away, because they're all still employed and working without exception, each one. Some of the funding was turned off here and there, but there's 10 different ways to go to continue those spigots. So it's still happening. There's no lesson here. So that's why we've been preaching so much for accountability. And part of the reason this movie is so important to get out there, and even if people are semi-familiar with the wet lab versus lab leak and have decided in their own mind it was a lab leak, you need to see the guts of what is going on out here so we can do something about it. And at some point get accountability. Hopefully when the political will appears somewhere, the accountability will come, because the danger is still out there.
I'd like to add something
Please.
to what Lewis said too, which I think is really important, is that you see a cast of bad actors, but who are they acting on behalf of? And you ask yourself, what is going on behind all this? You see even Anthony Fauci and you wonder, is he really the root of all this evil, or is he just an actor acting on behalf of all this evil? And the truth is the latter. And many people have a very guilty conscience after the work that they've done to cover up and support nefarious things. But ultimately, those nefarious things, when investigated, are so fundamentally disturbing and implicate so many aspects of our society that they're too damaging to investigate as a whole. And so what you can see in a pattern which we ourselves tried to avoid is what the media intends to do, and what even politically motivated folks intend to do, is allow there to be a scapegoat. And that scapegoat doesn't just have to be a person. You have to question yourself why the only thing you associate with lung cancer is cigarettes or asbestos, when there's probably 100 other causes of it. Or when you think about all these different medical studies that drive you to one hypothesis, and you know how corrupt the big science and big medicine is, and you know how much money there is to be made on, say, recurring chronic illness care, and that cures themselves are not profitable, and that we live in a society that's driven by profit. And you ask yourself, wow, if it could happen there, what the hell's going on here? My family members got cancer, or they have Alzheimer's, or I'm doing a documentary right now about Bruce Willis who has FTD. And you ask yourself, well, wait a second, what actually causes FTD? And you find out that the town that he's from had a massive factory, and there's many people with the same form of FTD, and it's a massive cancer cluster. But we're not talking about that. So why this is so significant is it starts out as COVID, which changed the world, but it quickly rabbit holes into several different things that threaten to change the way you feel about everything in your life, about the food you eat, about the medicines you're being prescribed, about potential cures for diseases that could end suffering for billions of people, and that exist, and yet we don't use them, or that the people who created them, some of them went missing or were killed or died in a suicide. So this is where you really kind of you're on a track and you're looking left and right, and you're like, this haunted house is getting scarier and scarier everywhere I look. And ultimately, you see these little bad actors, and I call them little bad actors. They're self-interested. They're waiting for money. They've compromised themselves at least once, which means they don't want to be exposed for that. And you start to ask yourself, isn't this the way the entire system works? Find someone willing to compromise their moral integrity, give them some money, and when you need to do it again, remind them they've already committed a crime and there's no turning back now, right? So that applied to COVID, that applied to many of these scientists, and even more so, we have to investigate the idea that it wasn't just in pursuit of a pharmaceutical solution to make money. It was also a military intelligence application, and that science was being used all around the world as the great ambassador. But really, what it was a Trojan horse to get us into labs that had potentially adversarial intent, and that people who you did not elect and who you ultimately will not trust when you know what their agenda is, are making decisions to put these people in places that could cause great harm to everyone you know, including yourself, and that they knew the risk. And not only did they do it anyway, they never were held accountable. And even worse than that, it was a massive audition for social control, which succeeded. Remote learning, changing of our economy, and trillions of dollars moving from the rich to the poor. If you were rich, you got richer during COVID. If you were middle class and you were working for a living, or you had very little, you lost even more, if not everything. And so if a pandemic with a fatality rate that we've now realized is under 1% in some instances, arguably as high as maybe 3% in some studies, if that can change all of society and move that much wealth from the rich, from basically into the hands of the rich from the poor, what about all these other viruses that they have out there? What would be the incentive to stop them from getting out? If A, you're never going to be held accountable for you being the cause of those viruses, you're going to be celebrated, and that a bunch of corporations, not just pharmaceutical companies, they're going to make money from it. And even worse, if you need to win an election, you can use it. So where does that leave us now? So unless we tell the truth about all of it, we're only scratching the surface. And Anthony Fauci embodied that really, really frightening thing, right? Because he was trusted in government to have access to all that information at the same time and go out and say, I am the science. And no, he was not the science. He's the government. And no, it's not the government. It's a series of multinational power brokers with massive control, not just in America, but other places, who dictate agendas, research, aftermath, profit, all of it. And you have to ask yourself, what does that mean to me? Ultimately, if you chose to have vitriol to your neighbor because they wore a red hat, or to the opposite, they wore a mask, and you're fighting amongst each other, the ultimate message is, if we fight amongst each other, we lose. Politics at large attempts to divide us in half for a reason, because it protects the interests of those who win no matter what when we're divided. Okay? One party says, we want to end this. They don't want to end anything. The other party says, we want to end that. They don't want to end anything. As long as it gets you to the poll and it makes you argue amongst each other and not look at them, they win. And isn't that exactly what happened with COVID? So if something is that successful at doing the very thing that benefits the people that created it, that knew about the accident, that covered it up, that made trillions of dollars from it in one way or the other, and that gained social control, not just over America, but over the entire globe, why would it ever be stopped, and for what reason? And the only way that that's possible is for people to make room in their hearts for the truth, and that the person that they looked at as the ultimate annoying, piece of garbage because of their political beliefs, and they're the reason why the whole country's wrong. And that goes both ways, right? Goes like this right now. Until the people realize that instead of going like this with each other, they have to go like this to defeat the very evil that lords over them, we will be in the same position we are now, perpetually, forever, with the risks becoming even more grave and the damage becoming unimaginable. And so the call to action is, drop your sword against your neighbor accept them as a human being, and unite against the very powers that seek to divide you. And when I think of Angel's platform, there's a sense of morality, there's a sense of truth. I maybe consider myself a more secular person. I notice that there's a lot of things about faith, which for many are truth in the heart. And I have faith in humanity. I wouldn't do this job if I didn't have faith in humanity. And so I do this film with Lewis and our partners as an act of faith that when the truth is revealed, we can come together. And I still hope that's possible. But boy, oh boy, is it a hard, hard journey ahead.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And honestly, you got to the heart of my next question, which really was just in short, why do you think this film is so important for people to watch and to share? Lewis, I'd love to give you an opportunity to answer that question as well. And then after that, we have some guild questions that we'll get into. But Lewis, why do you think this film is so important to watch and to share?
Well, I think first of all, it's a great story, and we are storytellers. I've always been one. That's what Jenner is. So I do want to remember this is perhaps the greatest crime thriller that I've ever come across. So I think it's a great story. As far as its importance beyond its story, it's incredibly important to correct and note for the historical record what happened here, because there are so many of us that watched this go down. Micah, you already said it, and just felt like we were crazy. And I've always found it's so important to just affirm all those millions of people that knew this was not what it was being pitched to be. And for all those people, it will feel very good to watch this movie and to be affirmed that you were not crazy. Your instincts were correct. None of this made sense. You had this Orwellian weasel on TV just lying to your face 24 hours a day with the latest nonsensical pronouncements, and you were right to think it was incorrect. And so I think that's just very important for everyone to just affirm that. Whatever they think they are, as far how much they know and how much they have researched on their own, there are pieces of this story in the movie that you have not heard before, and it will be good for you to just feel that you had that correct. And I think that's really important. Another element of this is accountability, which we already talked about a little bit, but the accountability is critical, or it's going to happen again, because none of the vectors or the groups or the main villains in the story have been dealt with at all. At all. We have RFK Jr. in the administration doing some things, but there's been nothing meaningfully done for the real cabal and the group behind what made this pandemic possible, what made the cover-up so possible and effective. And then the last thing for me would be the media failure, because I think we've all noticed when some terrible crime or political situation this size happens, maybe we've never had one this size, you can just feel the first instinct is the cover-up and the excuses. And then 10 years from now, there will be this open acknowledgement of everything that happened. I love to read biographies, and it's so maybe not entertaining. It's so disturbing how much time has to pass before the media will pick up a story that it once thought was inconvenient. And oftentimes the same media that was covering it up will then come out 10 years later with a documentary and try to win Pulitzer Prizes and Oscars on the story they themselves covered up 10 years ago, which was infuriating to me as a filmmaker, as someone from media, because here the story is, and now is the important time to deal with it, to stop it from happening. Now is the important time to get accountability for all those folks involved, because in 10 years from now, when people want to go get their Pulitzers and look fancy and smart, it's going to be too late.
Yeah, no, I agree, and thank you so much for sharing that. I'd like to jump into a segment. We like to offer an opportunity for our guild members to ask sort of rapid fire questions. So I have a few questions for you both, and they are rapid fire. So as quickly as you can. I know that might be difficult, But one question we had from a guild member is, who in the documentary was your favorite interview? And you can take that in any way you'd like, as in like it was shocking or they were just extremely nice. Why don't we start with you, Jenner?
I got to say that the star of the show for me, and someone whose story and whose moral consciousness I really identified with, would be Dr. Robert Redfield, who was the CDC director. He was someone, despite what happened to him, and despite his incredible knowledge of what happened in general, maintained a decorum, maintained a trust in humanity, in a way honored his own moral standards of not disparaging Anthony Fauci, despite the fact that Anthony Fauci had, in a way, undermined him for almost 40 years. They had shared many different spaces together, not just the one that happened during COVID. And I found his approach, having been completely blacklisted, to be really, really elevated. And I was so grateful that he spoke with me.
And Lewis?
I have to I would give a shout out in this context to Richard E. Bright, because he had just as the classic, he'd been jousting with Fauci for his entire career. So he's got a fantastic outlook and a fantastic turn of phrase. But if you had me choose, I would have to choose Redfield for similar reasons as Jenner. Redfield had a vibe of someone who's just above retribution, and he'd been so mistreated. He was brought to the job of CDC director because he was skilled and good and honest. He acted there with grace and honesty. He was then tossed out without saying much of a negative word. Perhaps we all wish he had put more of a fuss on, but he's just a sort of a very virtuous individual. And we have a lot of complaints for who's in government, who is at the top of these programs in government. And we worry about them, the FDA and the big pharma rotation of these people who we don't really look to be looking out for our best interests. But Redfield is the opposites. And in the movie, we see him go back to private practice. And there he is going down these halls with his patients, treating long COVID. So I would have to say Redfield. I'd have to agree with Jenner on that. But I do love me some E-Bright. And he's a great follow on Twitter/X too. Still fighting the fight.
Oh, that's awesome. And another good question. This is, it might be a little deep, but one of our guild members asks, do you feel this film or documentary changed you during the creation process? Lewis, let's start with you this time.
For sure. Massively. I wonder how I would best say it changed me. I mean, I was already fairly cynical. That piece of me has gotten infinitely deeper. That's unfortunate. But I think in a positive way, it has shown me you need to follow your instincts when you see something and it's meaningful to you. Being quiet is more damaging to your soul and your life and your just existence than speaking up, despite what those risks may seem to be. And there were a lot of them here. It was very sort of Cortez burning your ships vibes to making this, but never regret it for a moment. So the lesson there is keep seeking the truth and do what you have to do to tell these stories, and don't look back, because in every case, you have looked back in it and you have never regretted it, and it's been a positive experience.
Thank you for that. And Jenner, how about you? Do you feel this film has changed you? I know you mentioned a little bit earlier, but
I, like Lewis, consider myself a very cynical person. I've investigated many things. I have, since probably the age of 18, chosen not to believe anything that I see without fully diving in. But it changed me forever, because I realized my blind spots, and I realized what I was complacent to accept and what I was willing to challenge. And in a way, many of the things I was complacent to accept were some of the most consequential things. And I did so, like many people, just as a protective mechanism, because you don't want to take in all the suffering of the world. But I will never be the same since making this movie. I don't see the world the same. I don't see what's in front of me the same. And I will never see my safety in this world the same way. And I will never see anything coming to me almost from any outlet, including social media, the same. I see an agenda behind every piece of information. And I encourage anyone who's looking at this to investigate it enough to determine what its agenda is. And I think that everyone who does will come up with the same answer, which is the agenda was truth. And truth is something we can all partake in.
Thank you so much for that. We also like to close these shows just opening the mic to you both to let us know what's going on in your world, where people can follow you and everything else like that. Jenner, why don't we share with you what's going on in your world?
Well, I'm in the midst of a number of different documentaries, including a story about a man who I've loved my whole life named Bruce Willis. And I am also navigating a project about the disgraced Congressman George Santos, who's just found his way out of prison. Ironically, that I must say is a comedy. So if you've seen the COVID film and you're looking for some comic relief, hopefully the Santos film can give it to you. And aside from that, I continue to operate our studio Inside Studios out here with my partner Arnold Rifkin. I can be found at Jenner First on both Instagram and on X. And I look forward to ongoing discussions with fans, and people can always contact me if you have a
There
documentary.
you go.
Some of my greatest documentaries came into my inbox, so hit me up.
So that's awesome. And Lewis, how about you?
Well, yeah, I maintain a TV career, so I will be having some shows I still do on the side, and then Scott and I have 2 more documentaries that we are fundraising for right now. I don't think I want to reveal right now what the topics are, but in this same vein of difficult but obvious truths that I think our society needs to deal with right now and get accountability for right now. So it goes on. I think the best place for this, given the environment here, is just the Thank You Dr. Fauci X handle at Thank You Dr. Fauci. Best place to find me. I don't have a big personal presence.
Oh, that's fantastic.
That place will be hopping pretty soon, and that's always got some good stuff on, and we release clips there. And
Awesome.
Richard, right? Some of these guys comment on there.
Great. Well, thank you both so much. I just want to take a second and just thank you so much for giving us a moment of your time, and thank you so much for pursuing truth with this documentary and taking the slings and arrows of people that were saying, "What are you doing?" or "That's not correct," or stuff like that. So thank you so much for wading through that. If the audience hasn't seen this documentary, they can become an Angel member at angel.com/Fauci Guild. And that's where you can sign up to become an Angel member today, and you gain access to this documentary as well as hundreds of other films and series. And just want to throw out, we also have the feature Share It Forward. So if you are a Guild member, you can go to Thank You Dr. Fauci, hit the share feature, and you can send a link to your non-Guild member friend or family. So that's another way you can support this film, is by sharing it far and wide. So just please take the time to do that. And once again, thank you both so much for joining us, and have a great evening.
From the beginning, the lines were drawn. I said this virus came from the lab. Tony said I was wrong. I was only the head of CDC until I got iced out. I was told it was the White House. I don't buy that.
It was a cover.
Why would we trade the Chinese the most advanced biotechnology in the world?
He's a spy.
It's insane. I don't think this is going to be foolproof. Things are going to slip through.
Fauci knew and lied repeatedly.
First of all, thank you both for getting on the Zoom.
Yeah, sure.
These producers have asked us to investigate the origins of COVID, to go and hunt down Dr. Anthony Fauci and ask him a bunch of tough questions.
Gotcha.
And if we get anything wrong, I'm going to be committing career suicide as a director, and I'll probably never work again.
Even if you get everything right, people are going to hate you for this documentary.
It doesn't scare me to enter this conversation if it's dangerous. I do need your help to get the research right. So that's really the job, and it starts tonight because I have to go to DC in a couple days. I'm just going to jump right in. Let's look at this clip, right? Remember when Fauci went on Face the Nation that time?
Yeah.
They're really criticizing science.
He's repeatedly said
because I represent science.
He is the science. People who've been tracking this story believe that he does represent science. Everything wrong with science.
But the thing is that everything about the pandemic has been so shit-coded and politicized from the very beginnings.
Yeah.
Fauci does not love you, I guarantee it.
It's not popular opinion. This is not mainstream thought.
This is not broadcast by the mainstream news media because...
Have you seen the COVID misinformation page?
It's crazy, man.
Yeah, why don't we go there right now? Let's go through this page and figure out what has nothing to do with Anthony Fauci. We've got meteor origin, that a meteor carried the pandemic.
Wow, man.
Like deep impact?
We've got drinking cow urine and applying cow dung to your body can cure COVID.
And
nothing to do with Fauci, may be interesting to try.
I guess I'll try anything once.
I'm okay, man.
Now we're getting closer. Washing groceries in Purell.
Oranges in the sink.
He didn't say to do it.
Don't forget to disinfect your trunk.
Yeah.
But he also didn't say not to do it.
People should not be walking around with masks.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that was one of my favorites.
And loosely related to Fauci, you've got 5G.
I'm a guinea pig.
You've got the whole pandemic scandal.
Mickey Willett.
Fauci and Bill Gates, QAnon. We've got whatever Fox News said about Fauci.
Like a Rorschach test.
Thing they show serial killers and kindergartners.
We will not comply.
Thank you, and keep the faith.
Wow.
How do you not be cynical in this world, man?
Okay, right here at the top, directly related to Fauci, the consensus among virologists is that the most likely origin is natural crossover from animals.
Right. Feel sorry for bats, man. They get a bad rap.
Coronavirus jumps from an animal to a human,
Maybe,
probably in a wet market.
maybe not.
Where they
Did it come from a lab? Isn't that what we want to know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Totally consistent with a jump of a species from an animal to a human.
Right. This is just nature.
I mean, the paper will be available. I don't have the authors right now, but...
Okay, Wikipedia says the resurgence of the lab leak and other theories was fueled in part by the publication in May 2021 of early emails with Fauci.
There were like thousands of emails, documents, grant proposals.
Who knows what else?
Honestly, I have no idea, but I should tell you guys that right after the pandemic, I got approached to direct a movie about Fauci.
Wow.
It was not about COVID, it was about AIDS in Africa and how he saved a lot of lives. And I have his contact, so I'm thinking that I'd just start writing him an email. Here are the movies I worked on. I was supposed to do one about you, but you did one for Nat Geo and for PBS and not mine. And now I'm looking at this COVID thing, and there seems to be a lot of controversy.
You do not know what you are talking about.
All the evidence is pointing that it came from the lab, and there will be responsibility for those who funded the lab, including yourself.
So according to Rand Paul, Anthony Fauci is Frankenstein from the 1931 movie.
He's a liar! What we're alleging is that gain-of-function research was going on.
We got to ask him to explain gain-of-function research.
Where you're looking at a deadly pathogen and you're figuring out what could make it more deadly. There was a tremendous controversy.
It's biological warfare.
Is it biowarfare? Is it biodefense? Whatever it is, it was dangerous.
Why were we doing it in the first place?
Did you help the U.S. government spy on China?
Are you responsible for killing millions of people?
Actually, a serious question. Did you do it? Are you a sociopath?
Yeah, you probably shouldn't write any of that.
So what am I going to sign it? Like,
How about thank you, Dr. Fauci?
Thank you.
thank you, Dr. Fauci.
Thank you for your years of service.
Right. I'm sure he loves to hear that.
Thank you, Dr. Fauci.
Thank you, Dr. Fauci.
Thank you, Dr. Fauci.
All right. I sent it.
Nice.
I mean, I think there's about a 10% chance that he's going to write me back, so let's see what happens.
You've reached out to Dr. Fauci. This is not a hit piece. This is not a hit piece.
But it's tricky, like everyone's gonna have an opinion.
You won't get the disease, but you can carry the disease and you can spread it, you dumb. You're a dumb. You're not listening. You're a dumb.
Wow.
You're not listening. You're a dumb.
Yeah.
Just because you've been vaccinated.
I don't think people understand how stressful this job is.
This could potentially be one of the biggest stories of our time.
And I hope that you never have to go through COVID because it is evil.
20 million people may be dead. There could be up to $25 trillion in damages. And if this could have been prevented, I mean, the whole world has a right to know.
Dr. Fauci, thank you for doing all you can to keep America healthy.
I mean, look at all these celebrities.
You are America's scientist.
They worship this guy.
Anthony Fauci's work has saved literally millions of lives.
We are breaking down this concept of idolatry.
Yeah, I mean, it's dangerous when something as big as science can be falsely represented by one man.
In the end, very few people have firsthand experience working with him. And almost none of those people will talk to you.
I was told I need to talk to Dr. Robert Redfield. He was the director of the CDC at the time of the pandemic.
He's the highest placed person who's been outspoken on Fauci.
Patient has had long COVID since 2020.
His whole career got turned upside down from the pandemic, and now he's back practicing as a doctor and specializes in long COVID.
Currently being treated with antihistamine. My own view is that this virus was not of natural origin. It was an act of scientific arrogance.
He's blamed in the early days for a lot of the problems with the pandemic. But then there's other reports that say that he told Fauci that this was most likely a lab leak, and he was excluded from all these secret teleconferences that were happening.
He's also a colleague of Fauci's for 40 years. It's incredible.
And then in 2018, they get put in the same orbit again when Redfield gets appointed to be the director of the CDC.
One of the reasons I accepted the CDC job is that I have 12 grandchildren, and I just have a very strong premonition that our nation is going to have a terrible, terrible pandemic. New Year's Eve, 2019. I got a phone call from my team in China, and I was informed that there was 27 cases of an unspecified pneumonia. From the beginning, my antennas were up. I called my counterpart, George Gao, who was the head of the CDC in China, and he said, it came from the wet market. And viruses go from animals to humans. When you look at SARS, it went from a bat to a civet cat to humans. MERS came from a bat to a camel to humans. It takes them a long time to learn how to transmit effectively in the human species. And this virus immediately understood how to replicate effectively in humans. It was clear from the information I was getting that there were literally thousands of patients, if not more, and getting some intelligence feedback that this was a major issue. Everyone, without any critical analysis, attributed this to the wet market. And nobody went back and looked at people that had nothing to do with the wet market. And a couple days later, George Gao called me back and he said, Bob, we have hundreds of cases and it has nothing to do with the wet market. So we knew by the first couple days in January that this wet market story, in my view, was a ruse. I called the National Security Council and I told them that there was a situation in China, and then I called Anthony Fauci. And I told him, as a clinical virologist, this virus was way too infectious in humans right out of the gate. I felt strongly that it had been educated in the laboratory.
And Redfield knew that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was the most famous lab in the world for researching coronaviruses. So the idea that this virus came from a lab is very reasonable.
We were talking about it, and Tony argues that my premise is wrong, that I believed it came from the lab, and it was clear the aggressive support for the wet market being the source. I thought that Tony should embrace scientific investigation, but Tony only considered a single hypothesis. It was spillover, 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 spillover. I was perplexed.
Redfield thought this virus could have been the product of gain-of-function research, which is genetically mutating viruses to make them more infectious and deadly. Fauci had been a champion of this type of research for decades.
For gain-of-function research, I mean, Tony is the poster boy. He believed the best way to prepare for the next pandemic is to predict it by creating it. If we can create the pathogen that can negatively impact humanity, then we can prevent it. But this is a big difference between Fauci and me, because I disagree with that logic. I think we should not be doing this gain-of-function research. We don't have the proper biocontainment in these labs, and that could cause a laboratory leak or accident. So it's very dangerous. Of course, Tony argued this was science. I've known and worked with Tony since 1981. Tony believed that science is supreme, and the more you do of science, the higher up the mountain you go. You know, Oppenheimer learned the hard way that there's a downside to science. Right? He learned the hard way. Tony doesn't see the downside to science, and that is a big problem.
It's interesting because it has jumped species likely from an animal source into the human.
If you go back, Tony's got a lot of airtime on tape.
Viruses emerge from animal reservoirs.
He was very aggressive in saying that this had to be natural spillover.
Probably in a wet market.
The White House Coronavirus Task Force stood up somewhere, I think in late January. We did invite Fauci to be part of it. Tony made it very clear that it was spillover, 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 spillover. We obviously disagreed on the potential of origin in those meetings, and that's where the lines were drawn. But then I saw the papers that were published by the Wuhan lab. NIAID was acknowledged on the paper in 2014. That was evidence Tony had funded the Wuhan laboratory. And being an insider at the time, I said to myself, I mean, what's going on here? And I don't know the answer to that question.
Thank you, Dr. Redfield. I would now like to invite Dr. Anthony Fauci.
I can start off by putting it into perspective by telling you I often get asked, we have an influence.
And when Tony spoke, I was just very shocked at how aggressive he was to try to take the leadership position on being the voice of the pandemic.
The kinds of things we're doing here right now.
I was only the head of CDC, which, by all accounts, was the leading public health position in the United States, until I got iced out. People argued that it was the White House. I don't buy that.
We hope you enjoyed that sneak peek. To continue watching the full movie and gain VIP access to our entire library, join the Angel Guild. What is the Angel Guild? The Angel Guild is a group of millions of people like you transforming the industry. We want you to become a guild voter and greenlight our next hit project. Most films are greenlit by only a few voices. Ours are greenlit by you. At Angel, we cannot release a project unless it's been approved first by the Angel Guild. You get to have a voice in changing the film industry with stories that amplify light. Angel Guild members have greenlit shows like The Wingfeather Saga, The King of Kings, and Tuttle Twins, shows that are teaching children positive messages of family, faith, and building a hopeful future. We believe in telling excellent, meaningful stories. Your membership directly contributes to the production of more projects, allowing filmmakers to make more quality shows faster. In 2025, we reached our goal of 1 million members in the Angel Guild. This allows us to fund up to 5 seasons of TV shows like The Wingfeather Saga, Tuttle Twins, and others on a continual basis. In addition, your Angel Guild membership also grants you bonuses and perks that we are constantly adding to. Perks like complimentary movie tickets to every new Angel release in theaters, Guild early access to film and TV shows before they're made free to watch, opportunities to give your feedback to filmmakers, Guild exclusive live streams, discounts on Angel merch, and so much more. Join the Angel Guild today and help us make movies that matter to our children, our families, and the world. Welcome to the future of entertainment.